Hey everybody, John Lorden here. Thank you so much for joining me for this very special episode. This is a topic I've wanted to learn more about for years, and this is where it's going to happen. We're going to have some experts join us, but we're also going to be talking to a family member, someone that dealt with having a missing loved one. And I'm pretty sure many of you in the true crime community are going to recognize this person. I met Candice Cooley at CrimeCon this year, and we had a conversation. And she was very passionate about talking about canine searches, and I said, let's do that. Now, the main purpose for this is I want to put it on my website, missingpersontips.com, for families to use, families that might be looking for help. But on top of that, I think it's going to be informative and insightful for anyone interested in missing persons cases. So we're going to start by hearing from Candice about her experience, and then we're going to bring on some canine handlers to share their experience and knowledge. We're also going to give you a checklist, to kind of a quick overview of, can your case be helped by a canine search? So we've been working with these experts trying to figure out some form of questioning that makes sense for that. If you are a family member and you're looking to dive into certain parts of the conversation, we are also going to have the chapter skip feature. Just look towards the bottom on that play bar and run your mouse over it, and you can highlight different sections of the conversation, see which ones you want to jump to, because we know that you're looking for help, so we can do that. And with all that being said, let's go ahead and bring on Candice Cooley. And here we have Candice. Candice, thank you so much for joining us on the show. We really appreciate having insight for someone that has kind of experienced this firsthand, has been through some of the trials and tribulations in terms of canine search. And we did cover Dylan's case a while ago on the channel, but just to give you a little bit of a recap on it, Dylan Rounds was a young man with a very big dream. I was so impressed by the story of your son. He worked hard to acquire his own land in Lucin to become a farmer, and then he goes missing on May 28th, 2022. Now, ultimately, a man named James Brenner was charged in Dylan's disappearance in March of 2023, but there was a problem. Dylan was still missing. So when did canine searches become part of Dylan's case?
So it was actually pretty early on. We had some out there that just kind of volunteered to come out, and then the first big search that we did with the first credited canine team would have been on June 16th, 2022. So we were almost, well, we've been 18 days, 19 days into it is when um,
Yeah.
we really started pushing for canines and getting credited teams in.
Now, and that would be in coordination with law enforcement, right?
Correct. Yeah. So we did all of the searches, everything we did as far as volunteer teams, different volunteer search and rescue groups, canine teams, everything we made sure the invite from the sheriff's office was there. We had to fight for a lot of it. We really did. It didn't come easy. Just in case evidence was found, we didn't want to be dismissed because it wasn't properly gathered or there wasn't permission.
Yeah. And did you already have a sense that we were looking at a worst case scenario here at that time? Yeah. Yeah. So,
Absolutely.
and
Yep.
it's an interesting point. It's an interesting thing to just kind of highlight, in that you want to make sure that you are coordinating with law enforcement so that if anything is found, the evidence chain can be protected and that stuff can be used properly for any possible prosecution that comes up. And in Candice's case, they had a very good idea that something tragic had happened there. But you don't always know that. So even in cases where maybe you don't have that type of insight, or know that, hey, there was this guy that was also out of the property and we think that he did something to my son, sometimes you just have to still remember to kind of be smart about how you process this stuff. So when you get to those later.
Yeah, and I think a big thing to remember, so there is cases where it is missing people that there's no foul play suspected, right?
Yeah.
Um you're not always going to have your law enforcement agency stay involved in those cases. Unfortunately, law enforcement still has to prioritize what they do. So some things take priority. I mean, to us as parents, our kid always takes priority, but unfortunately, that's not the way the world works. So there's definitely going to be times where it's a missing person where law enforcement is just going to say, do whatever you want. And
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with that. It's just very important in these cases that is going to be criminal, that we're paying attention to make sure if evidence is gathered or something is found, we're not jeopardizing putting the criminal behind bars.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's times where law enforcement will also say, don't search, don't go out and do your volunteer stuff. We're not going to be supportive of that. So there's all kinds of different responses you might deal with in terms of how law enforcement
Yeah.
is taking those things on. How did you feel about these initial canine searches? Were they handled well? Were you guys finding results?
Everything was handled great. K9T, yeah, that came out with us, they were amazing. We were we were being led around by law enforcement a little bit in directions we didn't want to go. But after the first initial times they came out, they kind of would just tell Tori and I, we'd both reach out like, hey, we want to search here, we want to search there. And they pretty much just said, go do what you want. We were frustrated. We knew where Dylan's murder happened. We are about 100% positive where Dylan's body was in the beginning and feel that he was moved, and multiple canines told us that. We were frustrated because we knew we were so close. We were so close, but it is so hard in those vast areas, and when you just don't know. Unfortunately, people think even a cadaver dog versus a forensic dog, we didn't bring scent dogs out because it was too late. We would have had to run right over top of Dylan. And I mean, we were close. We were so close.
Yeah.
But we were just far enough off that the canines couldn't, they didn't know he was there.
Yeah, and there's several different types of training that these canines can be put through. So we're going to be talking to some of the experts about that to give you guys a better idea of the different types of searches that can be done, and maybe time windows. To Candice's point, like you can't get a tracking dog or a trailing dog out there because we're talking weeks after the fact, and those are really for situations, like a fugitive is running away. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. And that's, unfortunately, so as a parent and being in the situation, I have bred bloodhounds for law enforcement for a long time. So I've been very versed in the canine industry. I know a lot about them. So I didn't have these unrealistic expectations. I knew what a canine was and wasn't capable of. And that's kind of why we push so much on this, because a lot of parents don't. They hear we got a canine team coming out and everything's supposed to be solved, everything's supposed to be done. The world's going to be glory. This canine's going to go find our loved one. And unfortunately, a lot of these canine teams and handlers, they give the family this false hope of we're coming out. And so that means this is all going to end the day we get out there. And it's not fair to the families. And it's not fair the lies they're told and what the canines are capable of. They are still a canine. They do have limitations that people need to realize. They're not a fix-all. They definitely have their place in missing person cases, in homicide cases, in criminal cases. But they're not the answer to everything, unfortunately.
Yeah, and that's
nothing is.
Right. And that's why Candice was so motivated. And I kind of came in on the conversation. I think you were talking to Mike King at the time. And I was just catching the energy of like, whoa, 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 whoa. She's being extremely passionate about this topic. And I'm like, oh, but wait. Like I thought in my 9 years of looking at missing persons cases, I had a pretty decent idea of how these dogs operate and what they can do. And I did not at all. Like I've really done a deep dive just even prepping for this. That has just blown my mind. Even despite the fact that you had trained bloodhounds for years, was there anything that you learned, or what was the most surprising discovery during your search?
I'm going to fix it. I raised them. I didn't trade. I'm not a trainer. I can do sit, stay, and lay down.
Okay.
I have pedigree. Yeah. Yeah. I don't want people to think I claim to be a dog trainer because they're just my buds. One of the most interesting things, so I didn't realize in the small little circle I kept in what I did with my hounds, I didn't realize how many of these groups have been created. I mean, there are a dime a dozen. They're
Yeah.
everywhere, and they're telling people all this stuff that they can do. As far as what I learned about the dogs, I learned some more on the forensic side of it from Tori. But like I said, I had a really good grasp of it in the beginning, anyways. We learned stuff from each other. We're constantly bouncing ideas off each other, but I'm very frustrated at the amount of groups that have come out, and it's become a lot of this true crime world, and now that we've all got internet and we're all listening to podcasts and we're all paying attention, they've really exploded from that, but nobody's ever touched on, no, you're not going to have a bloodhound that tracks a little kid that's put in a car because they have air scent. And I've heard handlers say this.
Yeah.
Um, this is not, and they are giving these parents and husbands and wives and whoever the loved one is this hope that's non-existent. It's really frustrating to me.
Yeah, that's part of the challenge in working in this space is with private investigators, which thankfully I have some that are friends. I think I know one of the best private investigators in the U.S. And even when people come to me and they're like, "Hey, John, we're looking to hire a private investigator for our case," I will talk to that friend and be like, "Hey, can you give us some recommendations?" Because there are bad actors in terms of private investigators all over the place. And they will sometimes target families. They will sometimes be the one to reach out to the family and say, "Oh, I can help you guys, but I need a retainer of $2,500 and you're going to have to pay for my travel." So similar it sounds like we're having kind of a similar effect here.
Yeah, and we're just seeing this explosion, and we had a lot of that in Dylan's case too. Most of the time, when these organizations reach out and they want to talk to you, um, it was a little different in Dylan's case where I was familiar with canines, and then we put out there like, please, anybody certified, anybody could help, and that's kind of why Tori reacted to what we put out there. But for the general part of it, and same thing with private investigators, they're not out there headhunting victims. That is not how it generally works. You're trying to find a private investigator or a canine team. You're out there researching, or a lot of law enforcement agencies have ones that they use. But anytime somebody starts coming at you in a missing persons case or criminal, whatever it is, saying, "Hey, I need X amount of money and I'll come help you," that is sign number one.
Yeah.
I mean, that is huge, and I will be honest, like, once we got K9TF involved, so originally we were gonna pay for them to come out, and when I say pay for them to come out, I'm talking gas and lodging, that's it. Just their expense, and Box Elder did end up paying for that, but that's all it is. All it is a reimbursement of, we here's your gas and here's your lodging. They don't even do anything for food or nothing. That's it. Just get them there. So when you get people coming at you saying, "Well, for $2,500 or for $3,000, I'll bring my bloodhound out and he's the best in the West," I've heard that multiple times. That needs to be a huge red flag because these canine teams are not out headhunting cases. I can
Yeah.
tell you that.
Yeah.
We bounce cases, we work on cases, the stuff that we do through Dylan's Legacy and Missing in America Network, we work on awareness all the time, and I'll call and talk to K9TF and say, "Hey, this is kind of what we're looking at, but we don't have like we'll discuss the case. And as the case moves forward, if we can help, but it's never, I'm gonna send you in a canine team and we don't even know the last place this person was." So that is really something to look at when people come at you.
Yeah, that's a big reason why I wanted to put this video together and then even hit a little bit. And it's not an in-depth questionnaire, but like several questions that make sense. One of them being to your point, Do you know, like, is there a search area? Like, is there an actual spot where they were last seen or their vehicle was found, or it makes some sense, for that particular area to be searched? So yeah, if you have anyone coming to you saying, "Oh, it doesn't matter," I don't need the
Yeah,
last seen information. We can find them. Yeah, that's pretty a telltale sign.
yeah, yeah.
What was the outcome? I know it's pretty recent news. What was the outcome with James Brenner and the charge?
So he was sentenced on July 1st. Um, so he pled guilty. So he was charged with a second degree felony for murder, and then two second degree felonies for having the firearms. Not the outcome we wanted. James Brenner only serves 3 to 30 years. Many news stations, so many people have got it wrong that he serves 30 years. No, James Brenner goes up for parole in 3 years. Unfortunately, we
Unbelievable.
couldn't get it. We couldn't get anywhere at the state of Utah. We're kind of amazed that we got that. So are we happy with it? Absolutely not. But the legislation and everybody that I've been working with in Utah, um, I don't believe he's going to get out anytime soon, but stranger things have happened. The really sad part of this is that James Brenner is serving 1 to 15 years for shooting my son in the head twice with two different guns. He is serving 2 to 15 years for having the guns he shot my son with. He gets more time for having the guns than shooting Dylan,
That is unbelievable.
which is
Yeah.
which is some of the stuff we're working on changing in Utah. So, you
Yeah.
know,
Now, was this in part due to because he was admitting to the crime, or was he helpful in any way with the information that he gave?
so he did lead us to he did take law enforcement to Dylan's remains, let him write to him.
Okay.
And that's why I say when I say with the canines, we were so close. I
Yeah.
mean, we drove within 100 yards of Dylan probably 400 times.
Wow. Yeah.
So close. But once again, um, when you're looking through thousands upon thousands of acres, how many other places did you drive by that were 100 yards away? How many other places did you run canines that were, um, and it's not that we didn't cover a lot of ground, and it's not, but we just kind of dotted all around it. It was just this little like blank area that would have been one of the first ones this spring that we would have hit, and we'd have found him because Dylan was unearthed at that point from erosion. We would have found him.
Okay.
But
Okay.
then we would have had to go through a trial. We would have had, so just fight, like at that point, why wouldn't James Brenner go through a trial? So it worked out the best. We made the best deal we felt we could to keep him in prison and get our son.
Yeah, and despite him coming up for parole options, I think that's going to be a hard sell, especially at the 3 year mark. Yeah, but
Yeah,
it's just unfair for you because you guys are going to have to go through that feeling of like, oh, is this the one? Are they going to let him out this time? If not this time, then when's he checking in again? Is it every year from that point forward, or every few
every
years?
year, yeah,
Yeah,
every year.
yeah,
So, yeah, I mean, that would be a lifelong. I think about it and I think, okay, if they do not let James Brenner out and he lives for another 20 years, which I'm sure he will, let's say it's even 15 years, I'll be almost 60 years old and still having to attend
yeah,
parole hearings for my son's right. Like that I think about that. And that's, I mean, I'm at that point, I'll have a 15-year-old granddaughter from Dylan's sister that will watch us all go to parole hearings for the uncle she never got to meet.
yeah, yeah.
So that's a tough one to think about.
It sure is. It sure is. It's so weird. It just you're already saddled with this loss that you feel every single day. And then you just
Mhm.
have this extra layer of, oh, by the way, you have to go see that guy again.
Yeah.
You have to go sit in that room. You might have to speak. You might have to, give another statement time and time again, trying to keep him there. I know there's certain families that run to get petitions together and do all kinds of, like, there's work around the management of trying to keep them in prison. And it seems really
Yeah.
unfair.
I think like a lot of his background is going to speak for him. I mean, he's already served time for attempted murder in another state. I think so. We had to write letters to the parole board that went in, and then also went into the pre-sentence report. And my words to them were, if you let this man out, you're letting him out into your community where your children, where your loved ones reside, play, and live. He's going to have nothing and no one. So you let him out. When is it going to be one of your loved ones with 2 bullet holes to his head? Because he will go back to violence.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of how I left my statement, because that is a true statement. I mean, his whole criminal history crisscrosses the country. It starts in Maine and comes all the way to Nevada and then back to Utah. It's not a small one.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Box Elder didn't do their job and arrest them in 2021 like they should have. We wouldn't be having this conversation.
Right. Right. Mm. So, what's the big takeaway that you would like to share with families that might be in a similar situation to what you were in, that are looking at this video, trying to figure out, is canine search effort the right thing for us? What's your big message for them?
So I want people to know, like I said, when it comes to canines, they are not 100 proof. They are not a guarantee, and they are not a fix all. You need a location to start. As much time as we spent out with canines on Dylan's case, and we had a starting place, and it's still we checked off a lot of boxes, and that is one thing I really want people to realize is just because you have a certified canine team that comes out and you don't find anything, don't look at that as a failure, because actually what that is a box checked off that is not where your loved one is. So that means you can move on and you can grid out another area. So it's never a failure just because something isn't found. It's just an area you can move away from and go to a next one. And don't get frustrated. I watch the dogs around all the time. I watched them around on Dylan's case. I watch tracking dogs, train dogs get frustrated too. So and don't over expect what they can do. A lot of people don't understand they can't run in the heat very long. When these working dogs are working, even though you may be only covering 5 miles or 3 miles, they're not they're doing square miles, they're doing grids. Don't get frustrated when the handlers say, my dog needs a break, or it's too hot now, it's 78 degrees, we don't want to run any longer. Because realistically, you're keeping from burning the dog. You don't want to toast a dog in the heat, and it will happen. Listen to your handlers. They know what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just let the dogs work and do what they do.
Well, I think you just said the magic words, listen to the handlers. And I think it's about time that we go ahead and bring on. Now, did both Kevin and Tori help you with these searches?
No, Kevin, I met Kevin through Tori.
Okay.
I did have a team lined out to come out from Salt Lake PD that I worked with, that Box Elder turned away. And I knew the reality that more than likely we were too late, but once again, it's your child. So then through Tori, I've needed somebody in the bloodhound side of things that isn't me, because it's biased. Sounds biased coming from me because I've bred them for so long and I love the breed so much. So that's kind of where Kevin stepped in for us, is he takes that tracking dog side over for us.
So joining us now, we have two canine handlers and trainers, I guess. Tori, do you train also? I know Kevin trains.
I do.
Okay. Please, Tori, let's start with you. Tell us who you are and your experience with canine search.
Yeah, John, thanks for having me on here. So I'm Tori Swan. I'm the founder of Canine Task Force. Been involved in the dog-related industry for a lot of years, but most recently in the detection industry for the last 8 years. And more specifically in the detection industry has been forensics. So that's what my unit is based on. And so we deploy nationwide on criminal and death investigations with our forensic canines.
I was also, thank you for sending your resume. I was so impressed at all the different
Sure.
roles and ways that you've helped with law enforcement. And one particular thing stood out to me, and I'm so thankful that you have this type of experience, having worked as a family liaison officer and victims advocate. That is just such a great touch, I think, to have for this. So I'm just thankful that you have that. Also, what are the names and breeds of your dogs?
Yeah, so I own two working canines. I have Canine Fury, is a 3.5-year-old Belgian Malinois, and I have Canine Compass, that is a 7.5-year-old Border Collie, and then we have four other canines on our unit as well.
Awesome, awesome. And that was another thing Tori actually sent me. And it's great because I never even thought about this. Fury and Compass have their own resumes as well. And what a great way to actually learn about, these services. If you're looking to have someone come out and help you, there's Tori's resume, there's Fury's resume, and Compass's resume. Kevin Baughn is also with us. Kevin, please tell us about your experience with Canine Search.
Good evening. Thanks for having me on the show. My name's Kevin Baughn. I started back in 1999 with my first trailing bloodhound, Zach. I got him as a 8-week-old puppy. And then eventually he became a canine with the San Jose Police Department. And we were training under Jeff Scheller at the time. Since then, it's been a long, like almost 25-year road here of working and training with dogs. I worked with Zach for 6 years. We did a lot of amazing work together, finding several missing people, and then also the whole criminal aspect of it. With our most significant case being one that became case law as it was heard in front of a jury in California, like approximately 9 years after the crime. And it was an officer involved homicide, and it was Deshaun Campbell versus the state of California, or the state of California versus Deshaun Campbell. And per the judge, it resulted in the difference between tracking and trailing, because I was the first person to only use the word trailing as I trailed the suspect. And then I had a second bloodhound named Remy with the Los Gatos Police Department. And I have been tracking, trailing since about 2004. I do mostly training now. I just recently deployed a couple of months ago, though, for the local police department here. And I've trained all over the world, all throughout the United States. And most recently lectured at the Idaho and Washington State Police Canine Conferences
Awesome.
on tracking and trailing.
Yeah, bunch of great experience that you have here. And on top of all that, he was in a Mythbusters episode, which happens to be one of my favorite shows. And the episode was Hair of the Dog, which I literally watched about a half hour ago. And there was an interesting experiment that you were a part of there. Basically the Mythbusters were trying to foil the dogs. They were trying to throw the dogs off. And in your particular segment, they had 5 different men that were walking the same path going out into a field. And then they would give a scent object to the dog and see if the dog can go and find the right person. And there was a bit of it's strange because so many of the results were so strong, but that was one of the experiments where the results seemed like they weren't as solid. Basically, the dog wouldn't indicate on the hit, even though it was going to the right person the first time. Do you have any insight on why that happened that way?
I do. What happened was my student, who was the handler, Matt Brode, took the uncontaminated scent article and then placed it onto the ground where all 5 people had walked, essentially taking an uncontaminated scent article and contaminating it.
Right.
So I think that's what resulted in the first round of question, because the dog initially took the right person and then went to everybody else.
Yeah.
And then I said, well, hey, you contaminated your scent article. So then we gave the dog the scent article off the ground in a clean fashion where it only got the person that it was looking for. And that one turned out correctly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Illustrating the importance of uncontaminated scent articles are super important in our world.
Yeah, we're definitely going to be talking more about that as we get through the questions here. Yeah.
So I was just going to say one thing. Can you tell everybody what you mean by uncontaminated scent items? That's confusing to people who don't understand, because when they think about it, I understand what you're talking about, but they think other people are in the area. So it's not just the area that's being searched. We're talking about the specific item and what the best items are to explain to people that need help from people like you.
Yeah. Kevin?
So essentially, the cleanest scent article would be, so the scent article is what I'm presenting to my dog for the dog to smell and then follow that scent trail leading to that person, which is the raw foundation of what I teach. Is this scent article equals this trail equals that person, and that person is where the dog is rewarded for finding the person. So it's the trigger that starts the whole search in motion. It's the trigger that starts the dog searching. Um, and I want the most uncontaminated scent article possible, meaning I don't want anybody else to touch it, especially anybody that's involved in the search. Ideally, I would collect my own scent article or train people to collect their own scent articles in a matter to where it's not contaminated by the family members. There's nothing worse. I have to first explain to family members, like, let me talk, do not get anything, because if I say I want something, then they run and go get it.
Right.
And then that now becomes a contaminated scent article, which makes it doable as it was demonstrated in Mythbusters, but not necessarily the best scent article. The best scent article would be something that's not touched by anybody else, only by the person, which we want the dog to find.
Now, are scent articles used only for like tracking and trailing searches, like immediate searches, or are they also used for these kind of more forensic and cadaver-based searches? Like Candice, did you have to provide scent articles or allow for scent articles to be collected?
No, if the Salt Lake Police would have came in with their bloodhounds, we would have. And I'll let Tori, you jump in on me on this one. But as far as the forensic canines and even as cadavers, they're looking for a scent we all carry.
Right.
They're looking for gases being let off a body when you're talking about, your cadaver dogs. And like in Tori's case, they do a lot of bones and remains, which we all kind of smell the same. And Tori, you can jump on and explain that further.
Yeah, you basically got it, Candice. Essentially, apparently the odor after you have become deceased is not unique. So the dog is learning to smell the odor of decomposition, essentially, which is not unique to any specific individual.
Okay. Yeah, and there's all kinds of different types of detection. We're going to get to that soon, but let's hit really quick. I have asked this team to help me formulate some questions because we know that there's going to be family members that are watching this that are thinking, I have a missing loved one. Is this the type of case where we should have a canine search going on? How do I make that happen? So there's a couple of basic things I know about it in terms of you have to have some type of clearly defined search zone. For example, if you have a case where a person goes missing, their car was left behind, you know where their car is, it's at the edge of a forest or something. So there's some cases where you don't have kind of that last trace information that can make it a little tough. And then if you do have a search zone like that, you have to see if you have access to that land. And I know it could be tricky sometimes when you're talking about private property. Sometimes it can take a lot of massaging to get to the point of talking to property owners, making them feel comfortable with those types of searches happening. Sometimes it takes years. Will law enforcement actually support or at least allow that effort? And I've seen in previous cases that we've covered where sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. Sometimes they'll specifically say, don't do it. And if you do it, you're just going to mess this whole case up and we won't be able to help you further from that point. I imagine that both of you work with law enforcement on, I would say, practically all of your cases. Is that fair?
Yes.
Yeah. Kevin, same for you?
Yes, I've only worked exclusively with law enforcement predominantly as a law enforcement officer.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I know there is, there's different cases where things get really, like, I know someone that's working on an extremely old and cold case at this point. There was a property that was part of that case, and they're just looking to try to get someone out there for a cadaver search. I don't know if law enforcement is really, all that helpful in terms of those types of efforts 20 or 30 years down the line. But so yeah, another question, this actually came up because I was trying to, kind of source more information from our experts here. And that would be, would this be the first canine search of this area? Is there an issue with areas that have been searched previously by other canines? Kevin?
So in tracking and trailing, you know, ideally my foundation is this scent arc equals this trail equals that person. So the dog inherently should ignore everything else except the scent that I give him or her. And so it just can make it tough because there's more contamination. And it does create some questions in your mind and sometimes when you're reading the dog, is it on the right trail? And your foundation and your training is that it is. So it's not the most ideal. I recently, like my case I just got called out on, they had 2 police dogs there prior to them calling me. And I specifically, they wanted to tell me what they did, and I specifically would not allow that to happen. I want my cases, my work to be completely independent. So I started my dog as I would from the vehicle that it was last seen at, and then as I was progressing down my trail, they're like, "This is where the first dog stopped," and then very shortly after that, "This is where the second dog stopped," and then that helped clear my mind up, even though it shouldn't be clear, but inherently that's the nature of the beast. And then I knew my dog was 100% independent of those dogs and doing its job that it was supposed to. So the easy answer is no, it shouldn't. But you always, if you have contamination, in that, especially another animal contamination, you proof your dogs off of it. You do everything you possibly can, but dog work is not 100%.
Yeah, gotcha. Tori, can you tell us about some of the biggest obstacles to getting a canine search to happen? Like, what are some of the reasons why do you get waived off, or do you guys know? I know you have kind of a checklist where you evaluate a case.
Yeah, absolutely. We have several different matrix that we put case information into just to determine if it's something that we even can, are qualified to, or want to respond to, or able to. Outside of that, that's a lot of internal reasons and safety considerations, et cetera. As far as obstacles, honestly, it's a lot of agencies still don't, they're still pretty unfamiliar with what canines can do and forensic canines, and even the difference between forensics and cadaver, which is absolutely a huge difference. And that's not really common knowledge, even in police departments and sheriff's offices. And then understanding the reality of what they are and aren't capable of. So I see that there's a lot of not ill intention on the departments, but just unawareness of the fact that yeah, a canine could help in this particular circumstance, or not all standards and teams are created equally, and so they might have a person who has a dog that finds a tennis ball really well in their backyard that has offered to help, bless their heart, and the agency doesn't necessarily know if that is something that, is that good enough? Is there better standards? So I would say the biggest obstacle is just really that awareness, or that maybe lack of common knowledge information as far as us coming in.
How do you get over that? Like, do you wind up, does a family contact you, and then you reach out to the local law enforcement and tell them your evaluation and say, "Hey, look, this is something that could be helpful in this case, and I'm willing to come out and do it. Will you guys let me come out and help?
Yeah, so sometimes, so in some circumstances, that has exactly been what happens. We cannot deploy on behalf or the request of the family alone, but we certainly have received calls from families that say we need dogs, and we explain that we need law enforcement support and request. And so then we can reach out to the law enforcement agency and then just let them know what our credentials are, and maybe get some more information of them to determine if that's even an applicable canine search to go on. And so, yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, Kevin, do you have any insight in terms of like tips or tricks that help get law enforcement to allow or employ a canine search for families?
Um, so coming from the law enforcement, retired law enforcement and detective, where I was the handler and then I was a detective in charge of cases, um, I think your best avenue to approach a law enforcement would be through education, and you got to present it in a way that you're educating them and providing them with the ability to choose that option. If you try to force something on, in general on anybody, you're probably not going to be the most successful. So I think you'd have to approach it with the idea of educating, providing an option, and going at it in that direction. Not many people respond to being forced into something well.
And I think that's a really important thing in terms of I see so many times that families are running on very high and hot emotions. And
Correct.
maybe, Candice reaching out to Tori gets all of a sudden Tori's kind of more calm level voice in terms of the law enforcement contact. And, here's something I can show you guys the qualifications we have. I can show you our matrix of rating this search effort and how strong it could be. That's really, I always say it's so important to essentially put a team together when you're dealing with these cases and get those pieces working in that way. What is the difference, Tori, between forensic and cadaver in particular? I'm hearing that there's a difference in these searches.
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, the the easiest way to explain the difference is cadaver dog is trained to detect intact or partially intact cadaver, or recently usually recently deceased person where foul play is not involved, usually on the surface, not intentionally being hidden and concealed. Whereas a forensic canine is specifically trained to detect and alert to human remains that have been intentionally altered for purposes of concealment, such as being burned, buried, dismembered, otherwise desecrated, covered with a different scent or substance or odor to try to mask that human remains are present.
Okay.
So that's the simplest terms that I can put it in between the difference of the two.
Yeah. And so which approach were you guys taking in terms of Dylan's case?
Yeah, so
Both.
Dylan's case was forensics. I'm sorry if I jumped on somebody, because it was pretty evident that it was criminal right off the bat. And of course, we can't, at the time, we couldn't rule anything out. And besides, that's beyond our pay grade. But what we were really looking for is potentially human remains that had been intentionally altered for purposes of concealment. So in that case, that is forensics, and it is very critical that it's critical information that one cannot do the other without being specifically trained in that. So a cadaver dog is by nature not trained to do forensics. So if you have a cadaver dog or a agency calls in a cadaver dog, that does not mean they have the qualifications or training in any way, shape, or form to do forensics. And it's actually the same backwards. A forensic canine would also need the training in the cadaver. It's easier to go from forensics to cadaver than it is from cadaver to forensics, but again, that's kind of semantics.
Yeah. Candice, I don't know how much you want to go into this, but I just want to hear from you about,
Actually,
yeah.
yeah, so this is a really good example, and that's why I wanted to touch on this. And Tori, not to overstep what you said, but to families out there, when Tori is speaking about her dogs, when we were out there looking for Dylan, we forensically knew something was wrong. Now, her canines, had we come across Dylan's cadaver at that point, still would have been located, correct, Tori? Like we knew at that point Dylan was still intact enough with bodily fluids and gases, for the lack of sounding morbid. That's what the canines would have located. You fast forward until almost 2 years later, April 9th, 2024, and then we all went out there on April 12th, and Tori accompanied us. No, it was the 17th we went out there. It was a family on the 12th. We located, Fury was very, very interested in Dylan's grave, located a clump of Dylan's hair and then one of Dylan's bone, and Fury was just telling us there's more here, there's more here. So when you hear these canine handlers, and like you said before, like these older cases, these 2-year-old cases, I mean, in all reality, anything after, depending on the elements, anything after, 6 to 8 months, and that's pushing it. A cadaver dog is unrealistic because the body is decomposed and deteriorated to the point that they're no longer letting off the bodily gases or the rotting tissue. And that's what a cadaver dog looks for, versus forensic dogs and Tories that can go out and locate a shin bone that was only, what, Tori, 4 inches long. So that's what I wanted to get across is, when you have a case that is getting up there in age, I mean, even like I said, 8 months, and somebody says, I'm going to bring out my cadaver dog. No, it has went beyond that point. You need a dog that has been trained on human bones with bone marrow, that knows the scent of a decomposing, decaying bone, because they still decay, and that's what the dogs are detecting on. It is completely different.
Yeah. Yeah. Kevin, what different types of detection, now that we're hearing there's different types of detection and different methods would be appropriate at different times. How many different types of detections are there for canines? Like, obviously I know about drug. Obviously we're talked about forensics and cadaver. What else is there?
So that's kind of an endless thing, because you can train a dog if you have a training material. You can train a dog to find anything. Criminally, they use dogs to detect like the devices in USB drives. So when you have, that's an electronics dog, so they can detect the electronics, and those are typically used in when you're detecting. You have a search warrant to clear a house, and for basically pornography or child porn cases is typically where those dogs are used, because they're hiding their devices. And then there's publicly, like, I know there's people that train their dogs to find bed bugs. And so they're out there because the dogs can find them better than anything else. So like their hotels hire people to clear hotels of if they had a bed bug alert or something like that.
Yeah.
So there's that you can, and I know there's dogs out there that they've trained to try to smell cancer, and they've had some success with that. So you can train a dog to smell anything. You just have to have a training source, direct the dog to it, and then reward the dog for finding what you do. And then the best way after that to evaluate it would be through double blind testing to double check your accuracy, and that you're not cueing the dog for what you want. And you can, it's really endless, but those are some more examples.
Yeah, no, those, and it blows my mind. I never would think about that, like an electronics tracing dog. Like, that's, especially sometimes when you hear about cases that a person goes missing and maybe they had, their cell phone battery died or something, like, there's some physical item that's still out there waiting to be discovered at some point. Now, I know from watching the Mythbusters thing, that was kind of tracking or trailing a live person in most of those cases, right? Is that a type of tracking that would come up in missing persons cases necessarily?
So that yes, that does. It starts off that way. We get a lot of Alzheimer's walkaways, or missing persons or a missing child. The key element is getting one there while there's still viable scent to work with, as far as that goes. So time is of the essence.
Yeah.
And that's a critical factor in getting a dog there. And then there's to jump back a little bit, there's also air searching dogs or area searching dogs that are looking for any scent. So as a tracking trailing dog, I have a scent specific trained dog that again, we talked about the scent article. I give the dog a scent and I want you to find this scent and only this scent and ignore all other people. Um, and an area dog would be one that finds any human scent.
Hmm.
Um, and so and then there is some scent specific area searching that does occur. And so that's not my area of expertise, but we do that as well, especially on the criminal aspect side, where we might be tracking a fugitive, and then that person has intent to do harm to us. So when the dog transitions from a ground scent to air scent, it gives us a proximity alert, and then we're able to switch our tactics accordingly, knowing that we're close. And so that could also come into a play as a missing persons case, because if trained to recognize that behavior and then there's obstacles or things in your way, but you're close, you can maybe help focus the flankers and search and rescue crew to a specific area to look into, an area that maybe the dog physically can't reach.
And are these all classifications of live find detection? Is that
Yeah, that would all be live fun.
okay? So in a dream scenario, and it sounds like basically if you've got like an amber alert or a silver alert, you might have a situation where you have a police department that has resources and they're able to execute like a live find type search immediately, right?
Correct. Like, a student of mine just sent me a find yesterday. So it's Cotati Police Department in California. He responded to Santa Rosa for a missing Alzheimer's patient that had walked away. He trailed that person about a mile and located that person.
Wow.
But he was there in a timely fashion, and so that was just an example that kicked off yesterday that I was aware of.
Can you tell us the difference between tracking and trailing?
So, like, I'll try to keep it a simple answer, but the simple answer is tracking is footstep to footstep, dealing with ground disturbance, mainly, and you could visually track. So that you see like visual trackers are doing the same thing, and so you can tracking typically is footstep to footstep where you're on the ground disturbance of the person that was walking ideally, or it's not scent specific, so it's to whatever ground disturbance the dog locks into, to whereas trailing is you're following the skin wraps or scent that has fallen off the person and then spread out on the ground, so you're not necessarily on footsteps, and that's what allows you to also work on different surfaces because you don't the tracking typically ends when the pavement starts.
Got it.
Where human tracking or trailing is you're following the scent wherever it may lay.
Yeah, yeah. I also love the information you sent talking about like pockets of scent and just like terrain, like looking at all these different factors that can affect, the dog's ability. Tori, got a quick question. So when someone like Candice reaches out to you, do you have a particular time cutoff between when you're dealing with one type of search versus another?
Gosh, that's a good question. It depends. So I guess when you're talking about kind of the difference between live versus cadaver, is that kind
Yeah.
of your
Yeah, like
question?
I imagine the
Gosh.
spectrum is like live find to cadaver to forensic, right? Is there any other steps in between that?
So to kind of clarify a little bit, forensics really actually doesn't have to do with the time that or the amount of time that someone's missing. It really just has to do with what has happened to the human remains,
Okay.
and that can happen within the first few minutes,
Right.
right?
Right.
If that body was desecrated or otherwise concealed, um, so cadaver dogs can be trained to find things that are very old, and they have historical dogs that don't do anything with criminal, but they find historical graves or Indian burial grounds or whatever. So just to kind of differentiate that. So when we're talking about live find versus cadaver, we look at lots of different situations for that. Um, was the person's intention to, intentionally harm themselves? Was it a person who, is overdue, but only overdue by a short amount of time? The weather's good. They had plenty of supplies with them. In which case, we're going to send out live find dogs. Just to give you a quick example, there there was a missing person recently who was older and had been missing for about 5 days when we first. Well, he'd been out for about 5 days. He was about 2 days overdue, and that was still in my head a very adequate time for a live find dog. Yes, he was older, but he was very prepared. He was comfortable in the mountains. Um, as time grew on, people were more interested in, potentially the option of sending cadaver dogs out. There was still, based on some, quite a bit of experience that I have with older people, it seems like they're pretty dang tough. So I still recommended sending live find dogs out. As it turned out, he spent 10 days out and he was found alive, doing super well. It was amazing. Um, but at day 5, there was still talk about, okay, we probably need to send both, right?
Yeah.
Potentially have cadaver dogs available as well as live find dogs. So much of that depends on the conditions. Are we in the middle of winter and this is a person that's already compromised in their health and it's been 3 weeks? Probably you're going to consider that, there's a higher likelihood that that person may not still be alive at that point.
And this is part of
So
your assessment matrix, essentially,
it
right?
is.
Yeah.
Yep, it is.
Wow. Candice, I just wanted to ask, having gone through this kind of first person, how you did, did you go through a period in your mind where you're like, I have to collect things that might be helpful in terms of forensics? Like I need to get a hairbrush of his, get his dental records pulled and ready. Did you go through some form of mentality around that kind of stuff?
Yep, we did. We had all of that. Water bottles, his nasal spray for DNA. I had when Salt Lake was going to come out originally. I mean, first thing I did was put plastic gloves on and put some of Dylan's shirts he had sweated in, some of his boxers that I had found, socks into plastic bags because I knew what the hound team would want. Like I said, and everything that we went through, and it got really crazy, as everybody who followed the case had seen. The little bit of work I had done, which was not near as extensive as Tori and Kevin, I was already kind of prepared as going through the panic of what needed to be done, just of what I'd learned from working with people like Tori and Kevin, a little bit that I have. So yeah, we did all of that.
Yeah.
We had all that stuff.
Kevin, I know you've been very vocal about that you would like to be the one to get the actual sent item yourself, but is there a set of conditions or rules that you could kind of give to a family member that might be in Candice's position that's thinking, oh, I better save this stuff in case we get to that point?
Yeah, I mean, she kind of hit the nail on the head. She gloved up. She kept you can't control. So the metaphor I like to use is imagine yourself walking wherever you're walking holding a smoke grenade. And that smoke represents the scent coming off of you, and then it falls to the ground, and then there is the scent pockets you were talking about would be productive sources of scent, would be what hold that smoke, as you will, or you can see the leaves blowing in the fall, and where those collect would be a scent pocket. So those are the visuals I like to give people. So you're never totally going to be able to control it, but you got to do the best you can if a family member needs to do it. And then um, if you're going to store it in a plastic bag, then I would seal up the plastic bag and then then put that plastic bag in a glass jar, like a mason jar, because that is uh, the plastic is not perfect. It is permeable,
Yeah.
as you can tell when you get some odor coming out of some stuff that might be growing in your fridge by accident. So the glass jar is the best thing to lock in that scent, and so that and lock the contaminants out. And if I was ever going to transport it in any way, shape, or form, I would want it transported, that plastic bag into the glass jar.
And what types of items should family members be looking to grab?
So uncontaminated is kind of probably number one, or the least amount of contamination. I don't think there is pure uncontaminated, but the closest to the skin, and she kind of hit some of the big ones, worn by them, closest to the skin, um, and unique. So I like shoes. If nobody else has worn the shoes, socks are usually good. Hats are good. Undergarments, shirts, those are some of the top getters. And then the nice thing that, again, my assessment is, a scent article like that is got so much of the person's scent on it, it's less likely to be contaminated. I did kind of where I learned that from was an example. I got called by ATF to go do a search on a partially burnt item once, and I hadn't had experience with that. And to jump forward, I then contacted my local arson unit, and then had them burn. I think it was about 12 different objects, and had 4 different dogs, and 12 people left in like a fire training center, with the big tower. And then they all spread out and hid, and we used 4 different dogs to see if we can locate who belonged to what article.
Oh,
And that's also where I learned. So to finish that story, in the middle of all that, a commander from the fire unit that didn't really know what was going on went into our area, went to a building, and then came back and apologized, and shook my hand. And then I presented my dog a partially burnt glass jar, and then my dog took the scent of the captain that walked out there and went to where he was. I didn't even realize it. I thought it was a failure on the jar. And one of my other handlers was like, no, he just went to where that guy came from. And I'm like, oh, oh, oh,
wow.
I learned a lot from that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's where I learned kind of, or I base my theory of the amount of scent on the article is very important. And so that might be more than you wanted, but that's kind of where I got that.
How long does that item, if you store it properly, it's in plastic, you got it in a jar, like how long can that scent item be useful?
So I guess I can't answer that specifically, because um it's as long as I need it, because it's days for sure.
Okay.
And like I get back to time is of the essence, and I really think a tracking trailing dog needs to be there within 4 to 6 hours is your kind of window. And then that's a well-trained dog, because the reliability of dogs declines pretty quickly after that. And
Okay.
then after 12 hours, the reliability of dogs really starts to go down dramatically. And I wouldn't put a dog on um, a a track or trail after 24 hours for sure.
For a live
Um,
find in particular.
for a live
Yeah.
find. So that's where I'm looking for that missing person right away, and that's kind of done through a lot of our testing and reliability. And ultimately, you're asking me the question of how long does scent last, is kind of where you're going with that. And there's a lot of, doctorates out there that study this for a living and can probably give you a lot more technical answer than I can.
Yeah.
My answer is based on my 25 years of dog experience and doing this, around the world, training dogs how to do it. So that's where my answer is kind of based on is the reliability I see in dogs, not the answer of, how long does scent last.
Yeah.
That would be a different kind of atmosphere.
Yeah, well, and I'm also getting you clearly have a very strong law enforcement focus in terms of these deployments, because even with the story that Tori told us before about the elderly gentleman out in the wild, like you were able to find him clearly past that 24-hour mark, right, Tori? So it is just kind of a different.
Yeah, it's completely different
Yeah.
because in this case, and this was not this he was not found by dogs in this case, um, but completely different than trailing
Yeah.
because, like Kevin talked about earlier, when we're looking for air scent, what we call live find or live air scent, um, the dog is actually looking for particles of the same scent rafts that are being produced that Kevin is following on the ground. A live find dog is looking for those scent rafts that are being carried, they're being actively produced by that living person and then being carried in the wind.
Right.
So there's an active or a productive source of scent there that the dog is smelling. And they can find that whenever the person is alive, right? Where they're not trying to track or follow the footsteps or the path, if you will, of where they went.
Yeah.
So the timing is completely different on that because the one is looking at the time that the scent rafts can survive once they've fallen on the ground, and then they're subject to all of the other environmental factors. The other is subject to the person's actively producing that, and then you just have to get the dog in the wind area where it can then find those rafts.
What are some of the biggest environmental factors that hamper your searches? What are the ones
That
that
to
make it
me,
tough for you? Yeah.
gosh, for us, again, it really depends on which discipline we're talking about. I'll start with forensics. So, environmental factors would be extreme heat, extreme cold, covered with ice or a substantial amount of snow or active precipitation. That would be or no wind or breeze is actually very difficult for us.
Yeah, I heard or I saw an interesting approach. I covered a case a few months ago and they released all the body cam footage, and I went through it all. And they had a dog that was trying to live find someone. And they were in this kind of valley that had a lot of foliage. And he was basically saying, he's like, my dog's losing it. But they had a helicopter that was also part of the search. And he was like, can you come down here? Can you bring the helicopter for a pass basically and blow the wind around down here? And I can see if my dog can pick it back up after that. I had never even heard of that approach before. And I'm also curious about rain because I've kind of heard that it's helpful. I've heard that it actually helps the dogs with tracking, but I'm seeing other things that say not necessarily. It can actually wash away the scent. Is there an answer on that, or does it just happen both ways depending on situations?
So I train people that scent is hydrophilic and that and kind of again I like to use some metaphors for people on looking at it. And again, this is kind of my opinion, but so where does mold or mildew appear, right? You have to have moisture and heat. And and so it's a biological material, reacts to moisture and heat the best. Your skin wraps are a biological material that fall off of you, and the dogs tend to work best in a area with decent humidity. But on the other side of the coin, too much of either one of those, and you're not going to get the mold or mildew appearing, right? If it's full wet or full heat, as Tori was talking about. So it's that mixture of both. As far as the water is concerned, if they're walking across a body of water, that's perfectly fine. We can still pick up the trail on the other side, and then that moisture actually helps the scent out. And they demonstrated that, I believe, in the Mythbusters you saw. The dog had no problems with that, and that was the second time they had tested that. And that's the cool hand Luke, I think, effect is what they're talking about. And so if everybody ran to the water, it's going to help the dogs out of unbeknownst to the myth out there that they were busting. And so we train our dogs to do that.
We've also been seeing a lot of pictures lately of search dogs that are on boats. So obviously they can smell through water at some level as well, right?
So the boats are really what they're looking for at that point is a submerged subject that is apparently deceased,
Yeah.
and they're actually smelling the gases that are rising to the surface.
Oh,
so
interesting.
It's not actually that the dog is smelling the person
item
themselves at that depth. It is surfacing.
Okay. That's a really important distinction. Thank you for that.
And so to get back to your rain question, rain is helpful as it adds moisture. And then where it becomes harmful is if there's massive rainstorms, monsoonal rain, and you can just see that water taking everything down with it. That would be your scent could be getting washed away with that. So that it kind of goes back to the what Tori talked about, the difference between air scent, a live find, and a tracking trailing is she's looking for that source that's emitting it in the air. I'm tracking the ones that have fallen in there, and so as those disappear, my dog's ability to find it gets hampered.
Yeah. Well, I want to steer the conversation a little bit towards trying to help people find reliable services. Candice, can you share with us how did you go about trying to find? How did you find Tori? Was there a selection process you were doing? Were you looking for specific credentials or?
Actually, it was a little different in Dylan's case. We were publicly screaming for any help. We'd already had some canine handlers that had come out that I just kind of shook my head at and figured I'll let them do their thing. And everybody has a cadaver dog. Every German Shepherd's a cadaver dog. Every Malinois is a cadaver. And so it's really sad watching this happen as we discussed. So yeah, when I seen her resume and nothing pushy, nothing, just, Dylan's case had caught on fire in Idaho, and she was in Idaho, and so the stars aligned, and it worked to bring us together and still work together. So it's one of those things where families, we've got, you got the Canine TF website, we've got Kevin's website up on Dylan's Legacy, we've got the Dylan Missing in America Network. There's definitely some other canine resources throughout the country that are accredited and good. I really strongly encourage people to do their research and just make sure you don't think, well, Tori puts it perfectly, any dog isn't better than no dog, because that is a true statement.
Yeah. Tori, are there any certifications that people can look for when they're looking for this type of help?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of certifying agencies, and they are not all created equally. So really the easiest way to determine if one is more valid than another is based off of whether the certification is conducted by what is called in the industry a master trainer or a judge. Those are very common terminologies and titles in the industry. It takes an extensive amount of experience to be either one of them. That is any agency who is using an official master trainer or judge to conduct the certification is a vetted and bona fide certification. There's hundreds out there that are all kinds of different names that call themselves a national organization or national certifying agency, and there actually is no such thing as that. So that's a pretty common myth, and I hear that a lot by a
Yeah.
lot of handlers. So that's just one thing that families can kind of be conscientious of, and like Candace said, research, 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 verify, verify, verify. Um, Unfortunately, there's so many well-intentioned people that really want to help but might not actually be qualified, that sometimes it's easy to find themselves saying things that appease the agency or the families, um, despite the reality of it. So it's really a good idea for families and agencies to actually verify that information, and that's not a problem for reputable, legitimate teams and canine handlers. That information is all accessible within minutes. I have all of that. I carry it all on my phone. I can send it to somebody within minutes, like I did with you with my resume.
Yeah.
My canine certification is right there. It shows the name of the master trainer who evaluated us, the certification date. My logbooks are ready to go. That's what you're looking for. You're looking for somebody who is able to produce that verification immediately upon request.
Yeah. Kevin, I think you had shared an email with me a method that you might sometimes encourage people to use, which was basically put the person to the test, right? Like have someone in your family go run down the street, sit in a car, and see if that dog can get to them, right?
So if you've got a trailing dog that says they can do some amazing things, confronting you because they've heard your cases, became a lot of press attention. I would just kind of propose a little scenario back at them, like, okay, I've got this little app called Man Trailing app, and I'm gonna have a friend of mine um, lay a simple trail, and it'll all be recorded on GPS, and then I'll give you a GPS, and um, let's just kind of compare how your dog does. That gives you a baseline of reliability. Any kind of a reputable person should have no problem with that.
Yeah.
And especially if you're, in this far edges of what is even possible by a dog. A little bit of delay is not going to help when we're 2, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, a week out. I've heard as far as 3 weeks out. I've heard people tell me I can do 5-year-old trails. I've heard all kinds of stories, but when I propose that kind of situation to it, all of a sudden the conversation takes a turn. So that I think you can kind of just throw that one out there and see if they really still show up.
Yeah. I was also surprised to learn about it's so weird because we think of the dog being out there doing all the work, and then if they don't find something, then oh well, the dog didn't work right or it didn't go right for some reason. But there's actually another part of that, which is the interpretation of the handler. Tori, can you give us some examples? Have you ever had issues with your dog's maybe not giving you the right signal, or like what are some of the challenges with the handler's interpretation?
Yeah, absolutely. That is a key aspect of working as a team, and that's a reason why you guys are the team. The dog is able to do one part of it, and and the handler is able to do the other part. So my aspect or the handler's aspect is understanding exactly the specifics of that particular dog. Most dogs in general, and I'm specifically speaking about forensics and air scent versus trailing, although it's fairly similar in terms of reading the dog. But in our discipline, there's about 26 very standard alert behaviors that we call it, that the dog tech usually does when it's in the presence of what we call its target odor. So wherever it's trained to find and detect, they have been conditioned to be rewarded for finding that, and they will exhibit certain behaviors when they're in the presence of that are not trained. And then we have what we call a trained final response, and that's the final thing that the dog is trained to do when it detects that odor. So the critical thing is us being able to read those 26 things or any combination thereof prior to that final response, or we might not even get a final response, but we still need to read the behavior leading up to that. So, yeah, there's absolutely challenges. There are dogs that have a propensity to do what we call critter, where maybe they get really interested in squirrels if they run by a tree and they see a squirrel run up. Obviously, we spend an extensive amount of time proofing those dogs off of that type of behavior. However, if you know that about the dog and you walk by, you see a squirrel run up, you see the dog look up the tree, with your training and your experience with that dog, you're going to understand, okay, that was crittering, that was not alert behavior,
Yeah.
right? So that's where I see probably the biggest weakness in teams that I work with is an inability to read their dog and to be able to tell when their dog is in target odor versus when their dog is in their own odor that they're hunting for.
Gotcha. Kevin, do you have anything to add to that?
Whew, yeah. So I'm of the belief that I've never said and state in my reports that the dog lost the scent, because scent is still kind of a mystery out there. There's not a device that's better than a dog or a computer. So really in almost all dog work, but I train it for tracking and trailing, is that you were trying to make a known from two unknowns. We don't know exactly what scent is, and as Tori talked about earlier, the dog can't directly communicate with us and tell us, hey, the scent's over here, dummy, or hey, there's no scent here. It's we're working together, interpreting each other's behaviors, and to where we're trying to find that goal. So in essence, we're trying to make a known from two unknowns as a foundation, and so that inherently is impossible. And so I don't say the dog lost the scent. I say, I'm unable to read trailing behavior in my dog any further. And I've tried all my productive sources of scent, all my avenues of escape, if I'm in an urban environment, especially, to where, you know, it's me that's not reading it. I don't know if it's there, if it's not there. I'm reading the dog's ability to find it. So there's kind of a two-step process is the way I look at it. Is and Tori hit the nail on the head. Distractions are a big key in this, and that's actually the number one killer of tracking and trailing dogs is they get distracted in an odor that they like better than the scent article.
Yeah.
And so we do extensive training in us, proofing those off of dogs. Um, and then kind of another way that I think a lot of these extraordinary claims in tracking and trailing dogs come from is what's called the clever hands effect, where the dog senses that you want something even though you're not giving it the signal, because you know the answer to what it is you're looking for. You could very easily subconsciously cue the dog to what you want, and it's reading those subconscious behaviors. Um, and so that's why we're really kind of big advocates of double blind testing to remove that aspect of it.
Yeah, yeah. Man, it's it sounds like you do therapy with your dog. I love your insight into that relationship and kind of understanding the gaps in it, and even the tone of just like it's not you, it's me, effectively. I can't read your indicators anymore. Sounds like a really special relationship that I'm sure you have with all of your dogs. Um, Kevin, where can people find out more information about you? I know you're pretty much into training for like law enforcement and stuff, but where can people find you if they want to see more?
So the best place to find me would be at my website. You can type into Google search the GA Canine-Idaho, or my website is canine-tracking-trailing-idaho.com. So K9 and then tracking-trailing-idaho.com would be
Gotcha.
the best way to find me. And then you can also, so I'm part of GA Canine, which is a larger organization. And that would be another place you can go where there's certified GA canine trainers all over the world. And so they could also help you if there's somebody in more immediate area of where you're located.
Well, we really appreciate you being here for this, and please stay safe in that new deployment that you're doing with law enforcement.
Thank
Um,
you.
Tori, where can people find out more information about you and your services?
Okay. Yep. So the dispatch number that I can be reached at 24/7 is 208-315-1026. I always have that with me. And then email is K9taskforce1@gmail. And I'll spell that for you. Letter K, number 9, task force, all spelled out, number 1 @gmail. And then our website is www.k9taskforce.org. And then obviously you can search Canine Task Force on Facebook and find us there as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for all your help and for being there and helping Candice through this. And Candice, I wanted to ask you something as well. Are you working with Missing in America Network? Are you part of that?
Yeah, I am. So we've kind of joined forces and banded together to grow numbers, and everything Jazz and I do is a coordinated effort with each other. I probably spend 4 hours a day on the phone with her on cases.
Excellent.
She does amazing graphics, amazing awareness. She does stuff that when I have the most frustrating day on a case and I just want to scream, and I'll type her this little blip and it's got cuss words in it and I'm mad, and then she turns it into this perfect little thing that gets my point across with taking all that out. And I'm like, man, that's amazing. And then sometimes she needs the other side. We've got more. Dylan's Legacy has a little more of the boots on the ground experience, a little more resources that we can get out there for people. So it's definitely a good match between the two resources and networks. And of course, everybody else that I work with and getting to know Kevin's been amazing. I've always kind of been alone in my own little bloodhound world. There's not a lot of us, it seems. So when you meet one, it's great. Like, okay, we're not completely crazy with our slobbering dogs. So yeah, and everything with Tori, she's taught me a lot more on the forensic side. We got a good network. We have a lot of resources. We utilize them the best we can and do the best we can for families. And sometimes that's only awareness, and sometimes it's a lot more. But we make that call with the families.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to give a call out to Jazz and the Missing in America Network. I'll have a link to their video. They've got this same trio talking even more about this topic. There's so much to cover in this. We can't get it all in this video. So I'll have a link to that down below. Please check that out if you'd like to learn more about canine search efforts like this. And DylanRoundsLegacy.org, that's the website you can go to understand more of Candice's work there, which is basically advocacy and helping other families that are in these tough situations. On behalf of myself and my viewers, I'm going to be making a donation to DylanRoundsLegacy.org just as soon as we're done recording here today. So thank you so much. Well, I know my brain is full, and for every question I got answered, I feel like I've got 2 more. This conversation could have probably gone on for hours more, but we've also got some great new friends here, great new resources, and if I need their help on any cases that we cover here on the channel, I'm pretty sure I'm going to reach out to them. Thank you guys for being a part of this, and if you are a family that is dealing with this, I hope you find this video helpful. There's a bunch of great resources, and these are good people. So I think you can reach out to them for some help as well. Thank you so much. Take care, and we will see you again here on the Lord and Arch channel.